Welcome to the Relationships Inside Out podcast with Doctors Gregory Siebert and Kimberly Murray, licensed marriage and family therapists. Join them on this journey as they explore the ins and outs of relationships.
Welcome to Relationships Inside Out. Today we're going to be talking about insecurities.
Yikes.
We all have them. They just look different for each body, I would say.
Yeah. And we want to talk about what are some signs, the impact it has on ourselves as an individual, the relationship, and maybe some ways that we can navigate them and work on them.
Mm-hmm. So what are insecurities? Insecurities are the things that we don't love about ourselves, maybe that we try to hide about ourselves, that we doubt or judge about ourselves.
Yeah, essentially it's tied to our self-worth.
Mm-hmm.
If we don't love ourselves, and it might be for certain reasons.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't feel like I'm good enough, or maybe I'm overweight, or I don't like my hair, or I have this disability, and anything to where we're judging ourselves in a negative light. And especially over time, how it erodes our sense of self-worth as well as our self-esteem.
And it's interesting to look at how it impacts relationships, that it's not just on ourselves, right? We often think, okay, if I don't like this part about myself, it just impacts me. But it actually impacts parenting, your partnerships, your family, your relationships, all the things.
Yeah, and especially with relationships, romantic relationships, that fear of being left or not being good enough for our partner and putting a lot of weight on the partner to validate and need. It puts an imbalance in the relationship. Because now we're looking at the partner as an object to regulate our emotions around our insecurity rather than navigating ourselves. And I think it's important to have a partner to support and figure out how to do that. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But ultimately, we're projecting that insecurity on our partner, and we're looking at them to resolve it. And this could come from, if we were to look at some reasons for these insecurities, I look at past relationships where maybe there was some neglect. Even as growing up as a child,
Family,
a narrative saying that you're not good enough. Anywhere with this message that I'm not good enough, or this part about me is not good or is unlovable.
And sometimes it's even less direct, still present, but less direct, right? If I grow up in a household where my family is constantly praising people who are skinny, who make a ton of money, whatever it might be. If I'm in the absence of that, that means I'm bad. That means that something about me is shameful.
And it's possible too that maybe it didn't come from anywhere, and it was maybe a society at large, or the cultural standards at large that we're not meeting against. Maybe your parents and family.
Social
really
media.
Oh God.
The news, TV, any type of media consumption can really foster this.
Yeah.
And we don't even think about it, right? It's passive consumption. It's seeing these, say it's body image. It's seeing super fit or super slender people. It is never seeing a person with a different body shape. It's really having that, what has become in somewhat citing away, slender, fit, white centric, tall body image that we expect to see. And any deviation from that, heterosexual. Yep. Any deviation from that, and we should feel bad.
Yeah, and it's interesting the meaning that we make as individuals if we don't meet some standard that's being pushed upon us. And just even the message that, well, if it's in the news or it's in the media, therefore it must be what people want.
Oh, good point.
But is it? Right? I mean, partly they're doing some research around what does the public want? What image do we want to portray? But at the same time, this is where we have control. What message are we allowed to? And just because it's published or it's on TV or it's somewhere, it's not true. Doesn't mean that that's actually something that we have to or want to follow.
I see it too in couples where we have one partner who looks at porn or notes that someone's attractive to their partner, and thus the other partner is thinking, well, I don't look anything like them. I don't do any of that. I am not as successful as them. Therefore, I should feel bad.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I like you bring that point. I have a lot of couples over the last 10 years or so, but doing this, that there's a partner who compares themselves to the other partner's previous exes. it's interesting because this goes back to this insecurity, and we focus on the negatives, what's going wrong. We tend to approach our partner, what's wrong, instead of, well, what are reasons they are with me? Why do they like me? Why do they keep continuing to show up in my life? There's something that's working, and our mind goes to why am I not good enough? And low self-esteem is a catalyst to this as well, this insecurities, because if you don't love yourself, then we try to make meaning of why I'm not lovable. So you're in a relationship and then maybe the partner seems a little distant. Well, maybe it's because, they don't like me in this way or X way. Right.
And it becomes almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Again, back to body image. That's a really common one we hear about. But if I don't feel good in my body and my partner pursues me for sex, and because I don't like my body and I say no, and I reject them, it creates even more distance and more distance. And instead of seeing, well, my rejection is why my partner is no longer pursuing, I'm seeing it as, no, my body, he's not attracted to me anymore.
Yeah.
Is why I'm no longer pursuing, or he's pursuing.
Yeah. Personalizing. We personalize the actions, and it must be because, and that tends to happen. If we're insecure, then we feel like it's because of us. Even to the extent I've had some couples that take on the emotions of their partner. If their partner's upset, I must have done something wrong. Well, where did you learn that? Where has this become kind of a thing to where if things are upset, you're responsible?
And that's friendships, family relationships, partnerships, where if something isn't kosher, oh, must be me.
Yeah.
It's almost, it creates, I don't know how to put this, but it almost creates this intolerance to being able to sit with people are unhappy sometimes for other things.
Yeah.
There isn't a way to fix it, and there isn't ownership to be had. One thing we teach our girls, my daughter started saying, it's your fault, or whose fault is it? And teaching her, sometimes it's not about fault, right?
I wish I had that growing up.
Right? Preach. But teaching her that sometimes people make mistakes, or sometimes people are upset, and it has nothing to do with you. And you can just sit in space with them and you can support them. You even can give them space and let them hurt. As weird as that sounds, like giving them space to feel uncomfortable, to feel sad.
Absolutely. This acceptance piece. Right. One thing that I guess is a big concern for me in relationships is when we're insecure, are we with somebody who's treating us like shit because that's what we feel like we deserve? That kind of link between, if I don't love myself and there's things I don't like about myself, then I'm not deserving of being treated.
Sure. And tolerating things because of it. If I feel like I'm unlovable or a piece of shit, well, of course they're going to treat me that way, so I'm going to tolerate it.
Yeah.
Maybe my parents did it, so it's even familiar.
And the unfortunate reality is there's relationships where that partner then intensifies that insecurity and feeds into that person's insecurity as a way to control. Now we're talking kind of emotional abuse, and which we'll talk about in other episodes, I'm sure, in depth. But more importantly, just demonstrating how this insecurity can play into these cycles a little bit. And not to blame, right? Of course.
One of the things that I think we're pointing out here is everybody's got them. Often when we're insecure, we're thinking, I'm the only one who struggles with this. Oh, my friend down the street, Susie Q down the street, she doesn't have any. She's perfect. Her life is perfect. And my hope, if nothing else, is to normalize, we all have these. They just look different.
And I think there's a message out there that if you don't, you're cocky. So then there's insecurity of being overly confident.
Good point.
Like you can't win. So,
but even just realizing like everybody's fallible. Everybody's got their struggles. My hope is everyone has moments where they are really confident and sure and secure. And there are moments when inevitably all of us are going to have that self-doubt, that maybe even embarrassment or shame, or just those pieces of ourselves that are like, I don't love that.
And I like challenging that. What evidence do you have that part of you is unlovable? Who said? Hopefully it's not anyone outside of yourself.
And if someone said it, that doesn't necessarily mean it's true.
Well, why do they have that much power over how you identify yourself is really the big question for me. And that's not me saying that I'm immune to that myself, but making sure that we're challenging ourselves of where does that message come from, and do I want to allow that message to have power over how I see myself? Like, why do other people have and other things have the power to identify who I am over myself?
And I want to give a little grace here, because my husband and I did couples therapy. And one of the things that I loved with our couples therapist that she helped us solve for me, more so for me. My husband would say to me often, why do you care what they think? Just brush it off. Just let it go. That is not within my personality. My personality is one where I absorb a lot of what people think. And it's a work in progress. I'm working on it. For him, it's much easier to, I talk about it being like Teflon, to let it slide right off of him. Whereas I'm more Velcro. And so give yourself grace if you are more of the Velcro. I'm
more Velcro.
Yeah, I'm 100%. My cat looks at me wrong and I'm offended. It's terrible. Whereas with my husband, he still has insecurities, but it's not based on other people's criticism unless it's people he respects.
Yeah, that's the difference. So whose message and what message are we allowed to have power? Yeah, really good point.
For me, it's literally all the things. And so that's a hard part, is coming into accepting that for him and for me, I'm not going to be the person that can be Teflon all the time. I'm working on it, work in progress. But can he accept that sometimes I'm going to struggle in a way he doesn't?
Yeah.
Can I accept that it might be harder for me than it is for him? And can I work on it?
Yeah. And like you said this a couple of times, acceptance. And I was hoping you can share a little bit about that as even a way to help manage some of the insecurities.
Yeah. So a lot of our insecurities come from, we should on ourselves. I should be different. I need to be different. Comparing myself. I talk about with my oldest, I gave birth to my younger one, and my tummy is not as it once was. Shocking. And it is jiggly. And she came up and jiggled my tummy. And my husband's immediate response was, no, must stop it. That's bad. My wife's going to be upset. And he was like, no, Harper, we don't do that. That's hurtful to mommy. And so having to pause in that moment and say, it's okay. This is my body. So the way that we come to accept, yes, I want to change my body, and it doesn't mean I have to hate it in the process. And I most certainly don't have to teach my daughter to hate it in the process.
And how do you get to that point of acceptance?
Ooh, it's brutal. So some
Not
of it's
easy.
fake it till you make it. Some of it is, because while she's doing that, it's not like inside I'm like, oh, I love my jiggly tummy.
Right.
It's still cringe. It's still a challenge, but it's coaching myself on, yes, I don't love where my body's at. And I made 2 whole ass humans who stretched the hell out of my body. And so finding pieces of it, whatever insecurity is, that our job performance, our sex drive, finding pieces where that's still a blessing.
So almost normalizing it for yourself, coaching yourself, and not allowing yourself to go down the rabbit hole, and then giving yourself grace for being human.
So that active self-coaching. Tell my clients about this all the time. And I brought this example up. Water the flowers, not the weeds.
Yeah.
If I'm feeding into my internal narrative of my body's gross, I'm not a Victoria's Secret model, I'm not who I was at 16, I'm going to feel like shit 24/7.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have to choose to then water the flowers. Okay. I'm not in that body, and that's okay. I'm still wonderful in all these ways. Or my body, again, grew 2 babies. That is an incredible feat, right? And so giving ourselves that really intentional, positive coaching on some of those traits, well, somewhat faking it till you make it, which is okay.
Yeah. And I like that flowering analogy. And I compare it to the idea of also the thoughts, interrupting those intrusive thoughts that we have about ourselves.
Yep.
Those negative thoughts are sometimes very powerful, in finding ways that we can interrupt them and replace them with, I guess, in your language, flowering those other more positive thoughts and finding pieces of it that we like. And accept the fact that you don't like it. It's okay that you don't like it. You don't have to love yourself. You don't have to love every part of yourself. We're human.
You don't have to hate it.
You don't have to hate it. And it's important to find parts that you love about yourself, and that it's not all, like in couples, I see this too, where it's hard to focus on the things that are going well when all they do is really come together and only try to resolve the problems. It's like very problem saturated. So there's this message that everything's wrong, which does not bode well for the insecure person. And
brains are geared that way, right? It's out of evolution. We need to spot the threat in order to stay alive.
Yeah. Perceived threat. Yeah. Perceived threat. And to whatever that is that to my self-worth or, somebody who's insecure, that insecurity comes up by poking to those negative things in relationships. It's almost to confirm the bias that something is wrong and it's because of me. So you see this imbalance as well. And talking about ways to help with that, I don't want to say that the partner should be completely responsible for the other one's insecurity.
Good point.
But I also think it's okay to be supportive and find ways to help calm and soothe that. Granted, the person with that insecurity that might be driving that, find ways to build self-esteem, find ways to self-soothe, interrupt those thoughts, flower the more positive aspects of yourself.
And again, we all have them. So my hope is we can support one another. I've got insecurities with my body image, with my job performance. My hobbies might look very different.
Right.
So how can I let his support in for me, but also offer support to his insecurities?
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to say, and we've kind of touched on it, but at the center, it's individual work, hopefully supported by your system, but it can't be based on that support. You cannot, you can't control your system. You can choose who's in your space. And if they're not supportive, choose to take space from them. But at least in the way I conceptualize insecurity, a vast majority of that work is individual. It can't be based on the feedback around me.
Yeah. And asking yourself, how much do I rely on my partner's self-soothe? I think about that with my wife all the time. I'm like, I'm an external processor. So I very much turn to her and I have to check myself. You know what? I need to process myself and I can't put this on her. And she might not be in a good place for this. But I think asking yourself and checking in, how much am I regulating on my partner? How much am I putting on them with this insecurity? And how much is my insecurity showing up in this relationship? And I talk about it in a romantic sense, but it could be friends. It could be other family. How much of this is coming off on other people? And am I relying on them to soothe this, to calm this down?
Our children.
Ooh, yeah. Talk about that in the context of parenting.
It's a hard one, right? But being really intentional about the language we use in front of our kids. If I talk about my body and I say, oh, it's so gross, I feel fat, which I do say, and I say it in front of my daughter, she starts looking at my body and associating whatever it is in her brain with that. And chances are she's going to start to think about her body in that way. If I'm talking about, I'm so shitty at my job, or I'm such a failure, that starts to create a narrative for her. Because if she's looking at me, and often our kids do look at us as their role model, their inspiration, and they think like my parents are badass. And then we're sitting here saying I'm a failure. Now those expectations have officially bumped even higher.
And for a lot of children, the parents are the main source of introduction to the world.
Yep.
And what's normal, what's not normal.
And so are we building language of I'm a failure, I'm the worst, or am I building language of, and today was a tough day and tomorrow's gonna be better. Or, I didn't do great at that presentation, but here's what I learned. Or I don't super love my body, or you have to be really careful with the body stuff, but talking about it in terms of health, not weight. I want my body to be healthy. I want to be strong. I say we, often therapists, at least I hope so, are talking also with parents and kids about when we give praise to our children, it's not about their looks, their body, not even always about their performance, but I love your effort you gave there. I love your creativity.
Yeah.
Nice job with kindness. Things that show our kids they have attributes outside of measurable things.
I love that because I have such a problem with our education system in the sense that it's very behaviorist.
Oh, it kills me.
Our rewards are gold stars, grades. It's teaching from a very young age that your value is external to you.
Yep.
So when we talk about insecurity and relying on other people, there's some normalcy to that. We all do that. We're kind of conditioned from a young age to see, again, our value is outside of ourselves. And again, the grades that you're doing a good job. So I love what you're talking about. It's how do we praise and reward for a characteristic or a quality that one can appreciate, right?
The journey.
Exactly. The journey, the process. But, and this is where you fall into the trap as adults. Like if I get a new car, everything will feel better. Or I mean,
if I just lost weight, if I just made more money.
Yeah. fill in the void of that insecurity through external things or extrinsic, whether that's materialism or relationships or.
I think about good sport, bad sport, right? If we coach our daughter a lot on, you're not always going to win. Sometimes you're going to lose.
I didn't do that well with that as a child. I needed to win. I needed to win because if I didn't,
I still do. It's the worst because it's ingrained.
And that's a very black and white perspective. For example, like perfectionism. I expect to win, and if not, I'm a failure.
Yep.
So
all or nothing.
So that meaning of when things don't measure up to the shoulds, we talked about shoulding on ourselves earlier. If I should do this, if you can't measure up to that should, which oftentimes is unrealistic, what does that mean about you? And exploring that narrative of, oh, when things don't work out, I blame myself. I even think on a higher power relationship with God of what does it mean about how God loves me or not if things aren't going well in my life?
If I sin, if I make a mistake.
If I make a mistake, then that means I'm not loved. Like, and what does that message do for your self-esteem? Even on a spiritual level, it can come out depending on the meaning we're making around when things aren't working and why. And maybe that narrative comes from family or whatnot, or if I'm being punished, well, why am I being punished from like a higher spiritual power, right? Like karma. And thinking about these meanings in our lives that are driving this narrative that I'm not deserving of anything good or I'm not lovable.
And I challenge, you brought up evidence earlier. I challenge clients to think about, what's the evidence that you're a good person? When we are in an insecure place or thought spiraling in a negative way, we can find all the evidence in the world that we're a piece of shit and we failed. But if you pause and think, okay, those were actually like 3 minutes of your life in the last week. What about the other minutes?
Yeah.
What is affirmation that you did something well? As a parent, oh, I yelled at my kid. I am the worst. She's going to hate me.
Like globalizing.
Yep.
That globalizing language that I did one thing wrong, but therefore I'm just in general a bad parent.
And I forget about those moments when she looks at me and says, Mom, you're the best mom. Mom, I love you. Or calls for me in the night. She wouldn't call for me if I was a totally shitty human being. At least I hope not.
Yeah.
That gets complicated. Anyway, but we negate all that evidence. We just kind of, nope, don't hear it. Don't see it. It's a fluke.
It's a mental filter too. You're only paying attention to certain types of evidence and we're confirming our bias that I'm a piece of shit or whatever that language is. And I love that because finding the evidence is also validating yourself through evidence. If you can find evidence of why you are a good person, why you're worthy, and it may be hard, it'd be difficult. Our brain naturally wants to find the potential threats for survival. So it's more natural to think of why I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
Continually that practice.
Make a list. Yeah. I tell people, write it out. I have clients all the time write out, what are your strengths? What are your positive attributes? What are the things you do well? Why are you worthy? It would be really easy to sit down and write about why I'm a piece of shit. That's not the work.
It's interesting. With clients, I'll have them write that list. I'll do positive and negatives. Their positives maybe 1 or 2, and then the negatives like 20. And then I'll also just to talk about confirming bias and our natural to find negativity. I'll take a blank piece of paper and I'll put a black dot on it somewhere on there, just very small. And what do you notice? That black dot, the imperfections.
Ooh, I love that.
But not all the white blank of stuff around it. And
that's powerful. I love that.
But it doesn't just exist in that life for ourselves. Think about driving. Our brain naturally finds a crappy driver. You go to any city, everyone thinks they have the worst drivers. Well, why? Because our brain is encoding the potential threat. If you intentionally look at good drivers, who's using their signals, things like that. I talk about this with clients who've been in like accidents and trying to find evidence that, the majority of drivers are good. If not, the statistics would be much higher. But that's not what our brain does. So these are things we have to make effort to is the biggest thing. Because naturally it's easier to go down the rabbit hole of insecurity and being negative. The effort is on us to find why we're good and why we're worthy.
Yeah.
And what I have to appreciate about myself and my life.
I'm just like in my head, like Rolodexing my own life of, oh shit, I do that too. Oh yeah, do that too. Yeah. Right. We're all fallible for this.
Absolutely.
So what do we do with it? So finding that positive evidence, which is hard. Sometimes I even have you solicit from others that feedback. I can't see where I'm worthy because I'm really in that hole. Okay, go to a friend, go to a partner. They're in your space because there's something worthy about you. Go to them, ask them. With moderation. Yes.
Won't be the only source of regulating. We don't want them to be the object of regulating ourselves.
But to pull us out of like the deepest of the hole.
Absolutely. Yeah. Need that support.
Okay, what else do you encourage people to do?
Well, we've talked about the acceptance.
Yep.
We talked about building self-esteem. Self-esteem is a big one on the individual level.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about the couple support.
We talk about validation, and we're going to get into this next episode.
Mm-hmm.
But validation is sometimes between partners or friends.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes validation is just within us.
Mm-hmm.
Man, okay, I tried. I put
Mm-hmm.
in my best effort there. That's the best I could do. And it was good enough.
Yeah. And that validation can help because it's
Mm-hmm.
adding to the evidence
Mm-hmm.
of why I'm good enough
Mm-hmm.
to help. Because if we have more evidence and more times of thinking negative about ourselves and not positives, it makes sense of where our self-esteem is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
So building that validation also builds that evidence, that
Mm-hmm.
sentiment about ourselves.
I encourage people to do positive affirmations.
Mm-hmm.
These have a little bit of a rap of being somewhat corny or cheeky. And yet people who actually invest in the process see the benefit. So affirmations aren't things like, I am amazing, I am perfect, I am better than so-and-so. That is not an affirmation.
My life's amazing.
Affirmation is, I'm good enough.
Mm-hmm.
I'm worthy. I am lovable. I am good at my job. I am deserving.
Mm-hmm.
I am a good enough parent.
It could be, I don't deserve to be treated like this.
Preach, right?
At work, I don't deserve to be treated like this.
Yeah, my boss she's a real a-hole.
Is that for yourself? You talking about yourself in third person? Did you file a report against her?
But I have people post affirmations. I have them write them on their mirror with like a dry erase marker or sticky note and put it on their steering wheel, put it on their fridge, places where we go frequently.
Yeah.
As a reminder, because we're not thinking all the time about positive affirmations.
Nope.
So remind ourselves.
Yeah.
We see that sticky note. When you see it, say it 3 times to yourself.
Yeah.
Say it aloud. Look at yourself in the mirror and say it.
And the reason why I love that, it goes along with the thought log we've talked about in previous episodes. And we're really conditioning adaptive responses. And these are adaptive responses about yourself.
Yep.
Because the initial ones are not so healthy. And that's for all of us. They go there.
Yep.
But the adaptive stuff and conditioning those positive ones helps balance that out a little bit.
Mm-hmm. I had a thought. It ran away.
Welcome to being
so even
human.
in this moment, like, it's okay. I'm human.
Yeah.
But try those affirmations or a gratitude journal. We've talked about this. Of finding the things that we're grateful for in ourselves.
Yeah. It's one of the top predictors of happiness.
Mm-hmm.
And you can do gratitude in terms of life in general, or you can shift it to yourself. Of what are you grateful about yourself to help?
For your partner.
And we'll talk a lot about that too in the validation next episode. But yeah, validation's a big one. It builds that evidence. Well, you know what? I've been validated for this. Like you talked earlier about your daughter validating you and forgetting about all the times that she has validated you.
At the core of this is this grace, giving yourself grace. Being human doesn't mean being perfect or Suzuki down the street or Victoria's Secret model or billionaire. It looks different for everybody. So give yourself grace. Sometimes we do the best we can in that season of life, and it might not be the same outcome as if it were a different season of life. And that's okay.
This came to me. I would just shut off social media if you can.
Preach.
And there's a concept called Facebook effect. And we're not feeling good about ourselves. We're insecure. We go on social media, and a lot of people use it for validation and external means of validation through likes and things like that. The problem is the stories you see of other people are the stories they want you to see. And people want you to see
highlight reel.
The highlights, the positives. And so you're like, they have their life together. Everything's amazing. And for you, you're like, this is shitty. My life's not like this. But the reality is it's not the case for them. And you might not see this as a newsreel on there, but then you're like, oh, that person's not married anymore. But that didn't get announced anywhere.
Nope.
They're just still posting and everything's wonderful and great. But then you see that status is gone. And it's like, it's a Facebook effect. And it's so unhealthy to use social media as our basis or means for what we should be or how life should be.
Absolutely. Think about all the filters and things too. Oh, they look so skinny. They just had a baby.
I like to put the tan filter on me all the time.
I need more sunshine. But it's such a good point. Even turning off like TV media. I tell people clean up, and I've talked about this before, clean up your social media and your exposure to things.
Ooh, I found a way to insert boundaries into this episode like we have every other one.
Okay, go.
Finding where these narratives that pretty much fill the cup of insecurity and putting boundaries on those. Who is feeding into my insecurity? Who's this narrative? Who's not good for me in my life? What's not good for me in my life? And putting boundaries up against them. I think we got a record going. I don't know how many episodes we have boundaries in, but putting boundaries in those things that aren't helpful for you and your self-image and self-worth.
And if there's people that you want in your lives, but they're violating those boundaries or making you feel small, set it verbally with them. I want to be in connection with you, and I can't have you talking to me like this. I can't, I will not tolerate you putting me down for whatever.
And we talked about some previous episode, but the reality of someone cutting you down and criticizing is oftentimes because they're insecure. And you'll see this in relationships. Why is one being critical and putting down the other person? It really, if we broke it down, comes to this insecurity. And it's a way that they're managing that.
And it keeps the heat on your insecurity rather than having to face their own.
Yeah.
We've talked about it even with addicts, right? Their recovery, keeping this person ill and using drugs or drinking, that keeps the focus on them being ill, not on me.
Yeah. It's almost like I have to make them know they're imperfect so I can feel more comfortable with my imperfections in this relationship, my own insecurities.
Yep.
So you'll see that as a culprit for criticism.
I love that. Another tool would be self-care. If we aren't taking care of ourselves, if we aren't giving ourselves time to rest, to heal, to relax, to feed into the things that give us joy, our hobbies, we're going to feel like shit. And thus those things we don't like about ourselves maybe go from like a small amount of dislike to I hate this about myself. My tolerance for these pieces of myself becomes much lower.
And even if these self-care things are seen as just small little goals that you do for yourself, so you feel you're accomplishing something, can help boost that self-esteem. And self-care, I think in the context of self-esteem and insecurities is important in the sense that it's something rejuvenating for that part of you where you can do and those thoughts are disrupted and you're not thinking about that. You're out being more present with that activity.
Gosh, this is so complex. It's complex because it's different for everybody. We've only brushed on some of the tools, and if anyone has questions about other tools, we're happy to give them.
Absolutely. Yeah. So as always, thank you for listening to Relationship Inside Out podcast, where we dissect relationships in any way, shape, or form that we can imagine. Again, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to message us at relationshipsinsideout@gmail.com.
Thank you.